Good day again. Welcome to Local Government Matters, where we are working with local government officials to support other local government officials. We are really excited today to have which I believe is probably the most important part of municipal governance, and that's the culture of an institution. In the past few conversations that we've had, leadership has come up as a very important skill, which Johan Mettler calls the soft skill being the hard skill. That is leadership and the qualities of leadership. But an important quality of leadership is building an organizational culture. And so we are privileged to have Shanaz Majid, who is the head of the Tshwane Leadership and Management Academy at the city of Tshwane, South Africa's capital city, who is an expert in organizational culture and is doing some fascinating work at Tshwane municipality at the moment in building an organizational culture, one that's not performance related, but service related. How do we as officials see ourselves as delivering services to the people who have entrusted us with their resources? And so she is going to lead us in conversation with Zile Njokweni and Lee Perniger. They'll all introduce themselves once Shanaz gets going. And at this point in time, I'm going to hand over to you, Shanaz. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashraf, and welcome, Fezile and Lee. I truly feel that I'm in great company this afternoon. It's delighted to be with you. I deeply respect each one of you, your work, and the institutions that you have come through and the stories that you can tell. So building organizational culture, and to get us orientated and situated, Fezile and Lee, I invite you to do an introduction. How have you come to understand who you are in local government? What brought you to local government? Fezile, you start and then we hear Lee.
Okay. Geez, it's a funny story for me because I grew up in a rural area in the South Coast, in the lower South Coast, a small agricultural town called Harding. So as I was growing up, I was making an application to Telkom for a telephone back in the day. So they sent a response where they were saying I must draw a map showing the location of my house. So I got fascinated as I was trying to draw this map. And it stuck in my mind because as I grew up and then I fell in love with geography, which later on I started town and regional planning. And for all my sins, town and regional planning then took me into local government. And as I was growing up, I also always had this idea of rural development, which is why I've worked for, all levels of local government, starting from a regional council that became a district municipality in Ugu. And then I worked for a small local municipality where I was more intimate with the community. And now I work for a metropolitan municipality. And I've been here in the local government sector for over 26 years now.
Right. Yes. Without going into my CV, I came to this space by virtue of having studied architecture in an earlier life and practicing in the city of Joburg before it became the democratic city of Joburg, and bumping up against issues of informal trade and trying to understand really what were the real problems and crises behind these architectural structures that we were designing and just rolling out without really thinking about what they actually meant from a policy point of view, led me down this very winding road into studying town planning issues in a multidisciplinary fashion for my PhD, working in the Treasury with the Neighborhood Development Partnership Grant, which at that time was the only part of the Treasury that was working directly on development issues with local government. And then moving from there into working as a consultant for the Government Technical Advisory Center, which is an entity of the Treasury, but working specifically with local government challenges, either within the Treasury or other parts of government, including City of Tshwane, as some of you may be aware of. So that's how I came here. Really a process of exploration, professional and personal exploration, trying to understand why local government is the way it is and how can one change it if it is not doing the thing that it should be doing, which is delivering services, amongst other things.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Fez. For me, what I find compelling about the topic that we are speaking about today, building organizational culture within local government, is that being a student of leadership for as long as I can remember and looking at what is it about what leaders do inside of government systems that make the organization meet its mandate, that make the organization a place of we feel proud to serve. We are meeting our constitution. We are feeling like we're standing tall as South Africans. So the culture gets defined, organizational culture gets defined in so many different ways. And I think at its simplest level, I love the one that says it's the software that runs how the municipality works on the inside, right? Whichever definition you feel at home with. How do you recognize an organizational culture? When you walk into a place, when you walk into a municipality, what does it tell you about that culture? Faiz, what's your take on that?
Yeah. So culture is it's one of the critical success factors of any organization. But in simple terms, the question is when you go into an organization, it's how you feel when you get there. You get a sense of what is happening there as you go through the reception area. And then you start listening to people and you hear what they say, the tone of their conversations. And I think more importantly, the junior staff, how free are they? Is it a place that is toxic? Is it characterized by fear? So I've had the experience of going into different organizations, of course, where sometimes you just feel when you're going in there, people are hyped up, they're energized. Like my kids would say, there's a vibe. It's very responsive when you're seeking help. You can see that people are taking ownership. And Ashraf was saying in the beginning in his introduction, there's a sense of wanting to deliver. There's a sense of service. But in other organizations, and this can, you feel a sense of fear that is existing. So that the temperature is not too good, if I can put it in layman terms. So I think that would tell you everything about the culture of an organization. And by the way, it's not like a homogeneous environment. You find, let's say, for instance, you in municipality like Tegwini's, different departments and all of that, they're not the same sometimes. The culture is not the same, but it's the same organization. So it depends. So you can take it at the level of an organization. You can look at the different departments, the different divisions or sections within the organization. Maybe the culture might not be the same. So it's difficult to generalize it, but obviously, it's characterized by, you can have a sixth sense. Like, for instance, for me, that has been in different positions within the municipality from junior, middle, and executive. So you get to understand what is happening in the different environments. Yeah.
Lee, feel free if you want to get in on that.
I'm going to echo, I think, some of Fazile's observations as well. And I think it's incredibly difficult to walk into a municipality or in any kind of organization and immediately be able to tell what the culture is. So the first thing I tend to look at is like, where are the pressure points that organization is facing at that particular time? And from that, I look for what are the attitudes towards conflict, that particular set of conflicts that is facing them at that time. Are they pushing that conflict to one side, which is, I think, what a lot of organizations try to do. They try to pacify conflict, immediately try and deal with the consequences of that conflict, to push it aside and, in a sense, nullify it, as opposed to perhaps taking a more agonistic view, which is a particular view of considering how democracy should be, and centering conflict and saying, what is the opportunity and what is the real set of problems behind this particular pressure point, this particular point of conflict? And then what we'll be looking for is, how do the leaders in that organization then tackle that? Are they sitting in silos and nobody knows what's happening in everybody's silo? Or are they making genuine efforts to come together with the people who are bringing those conflicts to the surface, trying to understand and unpick those problems, and then design perhaps some sort of temporary compromise, understanding that, of course, needs are changing, communities are changing all the time, and that these compromises are perhaps short-lived at best, rather than being kind of a finite solution in its own right. And the leaders also in that organization is not just the person or people or the politicians sitting at the top or the senior management team. It's every individual who has a function to perform within that municipality or organization can be a leader in their field. And like Fazile was saying, is what's happening in that organization is not homogenous. So you may find that a metro police department, for example, of course, is focused on compliance and conformity to a particular set of rules and bylaws, whereas a planner is involved in trying to develop the community or a spatial development plan or some kind of big multi-sectoral project. And I think that one of the things that we found is that when we're working with the Treasury is to across a number of organizations and levels of government dealing with local government as well as municipalities themselves, is that officials are very fond of designing a solution. And I'm quoting the words of one of our researchers, throwing that solution over a fence and hoping like hell it's going to hit a problem.
That's a great way of putting it there. Shift gear and look, Lee, you have done work across many a municipality in the country. You've lived on the inside of a municipality. Fez, you run your Municipal Institute for Learning that I've long admired, and it's part of the innovation from Dr. Michael Sutcliffe. And that's what what drew us together, us with the Tshwane Academy and yourself with Mile. And first day on the job, I came to knock on your door and saying, listen, we need to collaborate. We want to learn from Mile. So you have seen institutions at different moments of its life. In crisis, organizations that seems to be doing okay. So we want to look at the emergence of culture, right? When leaders inherit a culture through various transitions politically, administratively. Leon, I want to come to you now. Given the in-depth research that you've done and what you've seen, what can you tell us about when you have witnessed broken institutions, over-politicized culture? What is the meaning you've been making of that? And how do we get it right? How do we do better?
It's such a complex question. I'm not sure I can really do it justice, but I'll try. So one of the things that happens, I think, in organizations that are in trouble, even if they look like they're good from the outside, is that you'll see that there's a preponderance of informal practices that get the job done that may not necessarily align with what the stated policy might be. So, for example, and sometimes these informal practices are not done out of malice. They may be something that is happening at the particular moment that a particular official or politician needs to deal with in the heat of that moment. And a policy can only ever be a loose framework, and it doesn't perhaps take into account everything that's happening on the ground. So I think what happens is that all of these practices, informal ones and formal ones, are never really deliberated on at the time that they happen or after they have happened, to see what is the effect that has taken place within the organization on the practices that are supposedly formal, and then what are the impacts then on broad goals of social inclusivity. I'm taking a very long-winded way of trying to answer your question. I probably have lost myself in the weeds here, so you'll have to rescue me. But
from what you've seen, have you seen what constitute good practice where the culture is uplifting the institution to come back from decline? Have you seen where leadership practice has been absolute poison?
Yes, I think we've seen both of those, but nothing is ever completely toxic or completely okay. There's a kind of a spectrum between those, which might shift as the organization is maturing or declining or improving in its different parts. So I would say, for example, as some of the work that the City Support Program has been trying to do within the National Treasury with municipalities to introduce, let's say, for example, particular themes of work, which are very complex and in and of themselves. So, for example, let's just take township economic development. That's not something that one department within one municipality can crack on its own. This has to be something that has to be tackled across a number of those silos, in inverted commas. And the way that's being done is it's articulated as a kind of a process-driven approach by the City Support Program, where you start off by creating a sense of urgency within the organization for that particular thing, in this case, township economic development. And then moving from there and starting then to invest in building relationships in order to try and institutionalize this new piece of work or new theme or culture change or whatever you might be wanting to do. And then working from that to understand who is the change agent in that particular set of circumstances that has clout for the thing that you're trying to introduce. And then, of course, then there's some very deliberate steps that have to be taken in order to incentivize how this change is then landed in the organization, prioritized by it, and then implemented. So you can see all along here, there's many places where you can fall over in trying to introduce something new. And then, of course, as you're stabilizing and introducing this thing and institutionalizing it, one is providing in the municipality the central leadership and the support for all of the steps of this institutionalization of the change, the new initiative, and so on. And also never to forget that what you try to do is not something that is like something that happens in a snap of the fingers, but it's a long journey. And you have to be ready for that long journey and pack lots of good luggage and warm coats, because it is a long journey and can be quite difficult.
I love that metaphor. And you got me where you talked about a high sense of urgency and building the relationships. And that's at the core of what we are currently experiencing within the city of Tshwane as well. But how do we activate collaborative partnerships with a higher sense of urgency that drive and lead change? Fez, let's bring you in on the signs of culture collapse. You have been training various organizations that come to you. Mile has been around for a while. What can you tell us about the signs of culture collapse? You spoke about fear when you were making your introductory remarks. And how do you experience the signs of collapse inside an organization?
Sure, I've experienced a lot. Like if I can marry just my response quickly to the previous response about crisis with eThekwini, we've experienced crisis after crisis, starting, if my memory serves me well, just before COVID, when we had austerity measures, then there was COVID, and then we had the floods, the twin floods.
You had the floods.
You had the unrest, you had the violence. Yeah, we've had so much. Yeah, so then we were in a state of recovery. And so we were very not good when it comes to crisis. And there were crises before. Others are political, and perhaps maybe I can't speak about them. But you could say things seem to be changing over time. We're still doing things the same way we've been doing them over time. We seem to be struggling on managing conflict, but there's some things that we did well and other things that we did not do well. But the culture collapse, you could say it in the way our approaches were so disjointed. We're still working in silos, and we could not coordinate things properly. We were not supporting each other. We were very reactive. Our communication was not very good. And most importantly, we could not learn from our lessons. And then, having been privileged to sit in some of those joint operations committees, where you find that there's a lot of culture blame for some of the things that I've highlighted. We blame each other, and people are so secretive. People are hung on their ways. They don't want to share. And what happens is that then it becomes difficult even to facilitate a meeting, because there's this silence because there's tension. And obviously for us as municipalities, although things are changing, like now we are facing climate change, but we're very stuck into how things have been done. We are complying. We have to comply. Things have changed. We need to do things differently. Of course, compliance is good for accountability and all of that, yeah. But people do tend to have this fear of consequences, which is a stick that most of our leaders carry, to say, hey, you shall face the consequences. So we don't reward, or we are not very kind to failure. And as a result, you find that some highly talented people leave the municipality, and some of them are still around, like me. And you find that some of the ones that are still around are very much disengaged. Yeah, so I've seen this cultural collapse over a period of time. And I think we're at a point now where we need really to revive. We need strong leadership, people that will build. We would need to rebuild so that the municipality can rebuild a strong culture. So we're undergoing some kind of transformation and realignment, and hopefully we will be able to build a much stronger culture that used to be there, by the way, in the previous years, and move away from this I don't care attitude, this blame game, the apathy that has been existed, that has been permeating throughout the organizations. And I'm talking about eThekwini mostly, but I think it's something that has been, as your question you were asking me, because we're engaging with different partners, and it's something that you could see that it does exist in other organizations as well.
Indeed. Thanks for sharing that. I felt heartfelt to me, that it's very real, and I can tune into the emotion and the range of emotions that often get arrested inside organizational culture, and where the culture gets stuck and needing new energy to get ourselves unstuck and to create a new momentum for change. Let's talk about culture change, what's possible. Lee, circling back to your powerful metaphor you just mentioned, dress warmly. The journey is tough and long. So culture change is slow and it is possible. And what I've often experienced is one needs to maintain a level of energy and focus and have the stamina to go on this journey, so that one don't give up at critical moments at where there's pivots that's starting to show itself. So from the journeys that you've traveled in organizations in your current and past experiences, what have you seen works for going on this journey of change? There's you started, there's needs to, an upswing, leaders need to come. And how do we disabuse ourselves of this waiting for the leaders to come and rescue us? What do we need to do differently to become active agents of this change that we desire? So here's a specific question for you. Who do you see as the carriers of culture in organizations, or the saboteurs of culture? And how do we build bridges and relationships so that we can all mobilize our energies for this collective journey of culture, building culture change? Lee, do you want to take a first bite and then we circle back to Fitz?
Yeah, I guess everyone is a carrier or a saboteur of culture if you push them in a specific direction. What I would be looking at is I would be trying to understand how aligned are individual actions to organizational goals. That sounds like a very big thing. What are the stories that people are telling each other in the boardrooms, outside of the boardrooms, in the passages at the coffee machines about the particular issues that are at play? Are they hiding the issue, or are they surfacing the issue? And that for me would be a starting point, is to say, how are people rallied around a particular problem area? Are they involved in defining what that problem is or not? And I think in a toxic culture, those that are meant to be resolving a particular problem are often shut out from those processes, where they would be able to define that problem and be able to give some kind of critical input. I think the thing that's been touched on earlier is also that is really critical, is that everyone can be a leader in their own particular space. But that doesn't mean that the leaders are naturally always born. And a bit of education around that, and helping people to articulate what those problems are and how to bring together a range of different role players to be able to understand what a specific problem might be, is something that's so critical, and it can be taught. And we've seen the work that your organization has done, Chanel. So we've seen National Treasury try to do this. We've seen Mile try to do this, and a number of municipalities have also come and attempted to grow leaders at different parts of the organization, especially where they might be more stable. So, for example, one of the strategies that might be employed is, if you're in an organization that is in crisis, is not all parts of the organization or all parts or all levels are in crisis. So you would identify which parts are the most stable and perhaps work with those to enhance the problem-solving capability within the organization and work from those points of strength, rather than trying to annihilate the weak points, because that sometimes is very difficult to do. And then the other thing that is really critical is also to reflect on every action or initiative that is adopted in order to try and change a particular culture, and to keep on checking whether the culture change that one is trying to encourage is actually starting to happen, that there's some evidence of it. That's very difficult to do, because it assumes that you have got time to sit and reflect. And in a very high pressure environment like a municipality, you often don't, except in perhaps the most sort of informal, quick ways that are not really helping to change the overall organizational culture.
I love what you're saying, Lee, and particularly the power of the stories that people tell when they're outside the spaces where one conversation happened and the real conversation happens elsewhere. Fred, what have you experienced in this regard?
In this regard, yeah, the culture carriers, it makes me think of where I come from a rural village. So I would have easily said the culture carriers are the adults, the elders in the village who are the knowledge holders. But if I would to apply the same analogy to a municipality, I find that perhaps maybe I agree with Lee when she says the carriers, it would be everyone. But it also depends at what level of the organization. Are you at a strategic level, which is at a strategic level, executive leadership and senior management? Or are you more at a tactical level, which is my level of supervision and management? Or are you at an operational level where you work on a day-to-day basis, say, for instance, maybe directly with the communities? And hence the structure of the municipality, which would be, I would then say that the carriers would be in the first instance, the politicians who provide oversight on what everyone is doing. And then you have our senior leadership and management, our executives, who are supposed to be driving a strategy. And underneath them, obviously, you have the staff that I was referring when I was referring to tactical and operational activities within the organization. But there's also unions. I don't know what to call unions because sometimes they struggle between being municipal employees and being politicians. And then they hold a very important role in carrying the culture of the organization. In fact, they can make or break the culture of the organization. And in most instances, they've been accused of deteriorating the culture of productivity and performance in organizations. Whether that is wrong or right, maybe that's a subject for debate in another engagement. But basically, I'd say perhaps maybe we can look at it in that level to say it could be everyone, but we can then dissect it to say who's who in the animal farm, whose career and at what level, what mandate does each person have to actually carry the culture of the organization forward. But I think we can all find synergies and working together, that would then define the overall culture of that organization. Whether it's integrated, coordinated, or we very much disjointed, and that could
Thank you
define.
so much. We're coming up to our concluding part. And there's a few questions that I would like us to explore by way of pulling it together. So we want to be both appreciating and celebrating where good practice, where excellence, and how do we protect that good practice. Faiz, I want to start with you. You mentioned you used to have a good culture and there's a sense of longing to go back to what was good and excellent in your experience before. Have you ever experienced or seen the work of an inspiring municipal culture? And what made it special?
Sure. I think what held it together for me was the type of leadership that we have. I don't know whether I'm allowed to mention a name, but maybe I shouldn't. But the type of leadership we had that could support us, that could create this safety net for us, that is psychosocial, if there's a terminology of that nature, where you are allowed to fail. You fail and then you learn and you are encouraged to learn. Where if you make a mistake, it's not weaponized against you. An environment that is comfortable, where you can have your own small social activities and rituals that take place. It's not strictly professional. Okay, of course, it's a professional environment, but you are allowed to be who you are. And it's not based on personalities. It's about values. Fortunately, where I work, Mile has always been a small team where they also encourage collective leadership, because sometimes being a leader, you are just put there because by virtue of structure, but the people that report to you, for instance, they are leaders in their various aspects, be it in church, at home, in their own villages, wherever. They can collectively support you in order to lead a program. Yeah. And then for me, maybe just to wrap up on that point, is that a leader that has high emotional intelligence, because it could be difficult to work with teams, someone who's got empathy, humility, where you can laugh, someone who's inspiring. So I'd say in a nutshell, that's what I've experienced, where there's a shared sense of service and there's laughter, there's humility, there's comedy, and there's madness in doing whatever we are doing. And it then encourages us to do well.
I love that various blend of polarities that you've mentioned there. Lee, feel free to get in on it, but I've got a special question for you as well. Where do you want us to go next? You want to hook on to Fez first? Let's go there.
Yes, let me do that. I think the most inspiring organization I work is actually the city of Joburg in the late 1990s. And I think that was also around context and timing. It was a new democracy. It was the dawn of all sorts of things being possible. The organization itself and the new leaders in the organizations across Johannesburg and which came together from a number of different organizations with lots of different cultures and whatnot. It was so open towards encouraging innovation and experimentation. It made room for that. And picking up on what Fez was saying is that if something went wrong, it wasn't a case of, oh, you are to blame for this and that you would get a slap. It would be more around the case of how do we learn from this to make this particular situation better? And I think the autonomy that was allowed in that particular environment allowed for a lot of new innovative practices to come to the fore. Some of them good, a lot of them not so good, but always trying to move towards something that was more around what broad goals of social inclusion were trying to reach. And I think what we've seen is as the innovation got more and more embedded in the organization, and as the politics matured, and as the organizations matured, the pendulum seemed to swing from the sort of experimental side to something that was more around now trying to bed down this as good practice and cast some rules, some firm rules around all of these practices. And that's when we started finding that organizations like City of Joburg, in my opinion, became much more deeply bureaucratic and less experimental. And so I would like to see if this pendulum can swing back the other way to innovation. And I suspect it's going to be quite a slow swing in fits and starts to try and encourage something that's more along the lines of that kind of level of autonomy and experimentation.
A lovely, compelling set of polarities again coming through. So the final question that I'd like both of you to offer your wisdom on: how do we sustain a culture of public service during political transition or institutional fatigue? And we've seen our fair share. Lee, you're an author of right there at the cutting edge of seeing these shifts and taking a deep dive into institutional decline as well. So I invite you both. How do we sustain?
Let me jump in with, I think you're either going to make room for it in a very deliberate, overt way. Say, make an announcement, we are going to have a big culture change, which of course never really goes down very well. Everyone goes, sure, we've seen this before. We are so tired of seeing this, and we've seen it a million times. The other thing is to work around a crisis and use the crisis to help create a new energy within the organization. And that might be something that can work within an organization that is deeply stuck. You could take, say, for example, a City of Tshwane's financial crisis and use that financial crisis as a way to effect a number of changes within the organization. Some of them are culture changes, some of them are system changes, practices, and so on. Or you can just keep on plodding along and saying, I've got an IDP to do in a spatial development framework. I'm going to comply, tick that box and keep on going, and be very surprised when the organization falls down around your ears and you can't actually implement any of those wonderful policies. So somewhere between the two, Shanaz, I guess, is your entry point for trying to move and make a culture change happen. And then to keep resourcing it and reflecting on that change that you're trying to effect, and articulate it, make it public to everyone in that organization, and start building your alliances around that change that you are trying to create. Again, that can work perhaps in an organization that is unevenly stuck and not completely stuck. Yes. Let me hand over to Fez.
So as you come in, do bring something in more about having lived through many political transitions as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I normally measure using the IDP. It's my 6th generation. So that goes to about 20 something odd years. So I think, yeah, obviously in any organization, there are certain critical success factors. It all depends organization can be measured based on its people, the technology it uses, the processes it engages in order to solve issues, the type of leadership, institutional arrangements, governance, and how you evaluate and measure things for improvement. And like you said, culture is at the center of everything. So people can go, but culture must remain in the organizations. Like they say sometimes, not too respectful when they say we're recycling politicians, but the administrators tend to remain behind. So my focus would be obvious, because I'm also an administrator, based on administrators, to say when people come on board, they have to understand, or at least be introduced to the ethos of the organization. They must be able to, what I normally say to my team is that because it's such a big organization, you must make friends. But basically what I'm saying is that they need to build connections. But all of that also depends on the leader. The leader is so important, because we do tend to follow our leader, whether it's good or bad, because they are the value holders. And I think for some of those that are maybe up and coming, I think they need to have to be some mentorship and coaching programs, because up and coming leaders who tend to be in middle management are the ones that are engaged with the organizational culture on a daily basis. But to manage the transition now, I'm not a specialist, but I do believe maybe there could be some kind of tools and methodologies that could apply. But for me, like I mentioned earlier, it's just the little things that you can do for the team, the small social activities, the rituals that you do, things that you try and embed in order to build the team and its values. And I'm a firm believer of collective leadership. I don't micromanage. I don't believe I should be micromanaged, but you should be allowed people to be who they are, and you should manage that situation and manage it in the sense that by supporting them. Yeah. So I think the core to this transition would be the administrators that we need to focus on in this instance. Yeah. So I think that would be my response on that one, having observed all the transitions, because people come and go, and then sometimes we forget that they ever existed, especially with politicians. But with administrators, maybe they might leave a lasting impact.
Thank you, Faiz. Lee, please.
Yeah, I also wanted to raise this issue around like what kind of change is it that you want to see? Because we often think that change has to be radical, and that there's no other way of perhaps creating that kind of change. And I think if we understand that we have the ability to implement change in a way that's maybe incremental, it's less maybe daunting than trying to change, just blow up the whole organization and start from scratch. It just clearly, that's almost impossible to do, because the system that you're working in is very well entrenched in its way of doing things, and it's developed its own momentum, and it's very difficult to change it. So even those that are in the system will always acknowledge that the current efforts aren't working, and it's clear something has to be done, but what that something is very hard to pinpoint, and how to do it completely differently is not always clear. So all of the people that are in the system of this municipality are stuck in this particular way of doing things. They're trapped in that same compliance-driven system, which requires them to adhere to all those long-term plans, budgets, and targets, even if you know that they're not really working. So it's really critical to be able to understand that part of it is compliance, but part of it is also about trying to find different ways of supporting different parts of your organization to do the work in a different way and achieve that change in different places in the organization, hopefully all culminating towards something that is a better organization overall.
Yeah. Lee and Fizila, I so appreciate the rich ground we've covered together. I'm certainly have come to a point in appreciating this conversation of seeing that we are indeed in a moment of building organizational culture in a time of crisis in local government. And how do we repurpose the crisis to build coalitions of change within how we build culture, and getting very clear about the change we want and the skill set that everyone in the organizations and leaders are going to need to go on this journey of building culture, cultivating it, sustaining it, so that it can withstand the various shocks, be it political transitions, scheduled or unscheduled leadership changes, where there's a new capability growing in the organization to navigate culture and growing a new confidence about who we are as public servants. Thank you so much for being two of my go-to people. You are special advisors and partners and dear friends to me. Ashraf, you're another special partner, advisor, confidant. I'm handing back to you, my brother.
Thank you. Lee, what a fascinating discussion. It's a cliche, and I hate to use cliches, but I'm going to use this one, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the way you've unpacked that concept, the way you've unpacked what culture actually is, how to get towards the culture of service and the role of leadership. And I liked what both of you said in terms of let an organization happen, build with laughter, build on the strength in the particular department. The nuances you've brought to this conversation are really fascinating. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate your contribution to this conversation. Take care and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.